We're going to talk today about inflation, the economy, and at the time of this recording, the upcoming election, how what you need to do to prepare and how you need to view these things to minimize the effect that it has on you and your business. So, let's get to it. Welcome back to the Your Money, Your Life podcast. I'm your host, Aimee Cerka. We are going to be talking about inflation and economics, the economy, all those things over the next couple episodes. And at the time of this recording, we are approaching the election here in the United States. And of course, it's been ramping up over the last several months. And this series has been one that I wanted to really revisit because we did a combating inflation training back in 2021, I believe, spring of 2021. And I knew that it was time to bring it back, but now feels like the aligned timing for this. And whether you're listening to this real time or you're listening to this sometime in the future, like there's stuff that continues to happen, right? These events, all these things. So whether it's the election now, whether inflation, and we're going to get to like what that means and all those things in a minute, or why it happens, I should say. Whatever that situation is going on, there's things that we need to know and things that we have to shift our focus when it comes to the economy. So, as always, I'm going to break it down, keep it simple, but stick with me, okay? First off, let's start with this. Like, you are not the only one that's feeling the emotional roller coaster, for lack of a better word. A lot of people are feeling stressed. They're feeling distracted. And there's that uncertainty out there, right? Okay. So first off, you're not alone. We're going to start with that. But secondly, we have to talk about, like I said, the economy and these situations affect you and your human experience and your business. But we are not going to approach this from a space of fear and like Chicken Little, end of the world, like the sky's falling type energy, okay? What we do here is we focus on what we can control. And there's a couple things that we're going to talk through. So today we're going to talk about more about why some of these things are happening so you can understand the logistics behind it, like why these things are occurring. Because again, we fear the unknown. We don't know why something's happening, or we don't know where something looks like. We have that fear, right? So if we can understand why it's there, then you can have that piece there. And then the part that we're going to talk about, or I guess the other part that we're going to talk about today, is taking care of you. And then in the next couple episodes, we'll talk about like the actions that you can take when it comes to your money, both on the defensive side. So that's like the managing your money aspect, and then the offensive side, which is making money within your business and diversify. Yeah, we'll talk all about that in a couple weeks. Okay. So let's talk about like why, specifically inflation. Okay. And we're talking about the US dollar. The US dollar, of course, is the world standard. And that was put in place before some of these things that we're going to discuss happened. So yeah, even if you're elsewhere in the world, this still affects you. Okay. So the US dollar is a fiat currency. So what that means is it's not backed by anything. There's no gold or anything valuable anymore to hold its value. It simply has value because, air quotes, they say so. And as a result, the Federal Reserve can just kind of print money whenever they want. And the more money that's in circulation, the less it is worth. So at the time of this recording, the Federal Reserve had announced they're lowering interest rates, which everybody gets excited about, right? But all that means is like we're printing less money, so there's less money in circulation. So they control that. Richard Nixon, the US dollar used to be on the gold standard. So there's a lot of debate from economists and people who study way more than I do about whether or not we could have sustained being on the gold standard. Regardless, like we're not on the gold standard anymore. Richard Nixon was the president that officially removed the US dollar from the gold standard in 1971. So there's inflation, there's fluctuation of the money, there's manipulation of the money that happens by higher powers. But sitting here and getting stressed about it and worried about it doesn't do us any good, right? So we're just going to process that information, hold on to it, right? Acknowledge it. And my hope here, and we're going to get to more of this in a second when we talk about like taking care of yourself, but know the information, but don't stress over it. Don't worry about it. Don't get caught up in like, if the quote bad guys would do better or whatever it might be. Like, this is just information. Process it, understand it so that we know why these things are happening, but we're not letting fear control us and we're not letting fear rule us in the decisions that we're making. Okay. So let's talk about that fear. And what do we do when these fears, these stresses, these reactions, emotional reactions come up? And there's a couple things that can cause them, that can trigger them. But let's start with the fact that it's not always logical. Okay? Like the logical brain and the emotional side, and this is almost where like I feel like the Unstoppable Finances framework, it doesn't need quite like a revamp, but the emotional aspect of it needs to be highlighted more. So within the battlefield, this is really where we're at right now, okay? Because the battlefield portion of the framework is money mindset, economics, rules of the game, and your emotions. Like, it's all there, okay? So we're talking about the economics, we're talking about your mindset and how you need to approach it, but we're also talking about the emotional part of it. And the emotional part of it especially is the part that's not necessarily logical. And I'll give you an example because, that's just the way we roll, right? So I live in Texas, if you didn't know, and we had something we dubbed Snowmageddon in, I want to say it was February of 2021. Essentially, we had Arctic-like weather here in Texas, and the Texas grid, the Texas infrastructure is not equipped to handle that. Okay. So it was like a week of like sub-freezing temperatures. There was, the power grid couldn't keep up. So there was a lot of people who were out without electricity. There was people whose pipes froze, so they didn't have water. There was people who didn't have food, and so on and so on. Okay. So it was a very traumatic time for a lot of people. And, like we rallied, for the most part, there were people who died, but we're okay, right? But during that time, during that week, the neighborhood I live in has a fire station here in the neighborhood. So even when they were doing the rolling blackouts to help conserve power, we never lost power at all. Now, I have always been somebody, or not always, last probably 4 or 5 years or so, I've been somebody who is more prepared when it comes to food, water, even like, I guess, electricity. I don't have like a generator, but we've got the fireplace, we have firewood. So like I could keep the kids warm. I know we would be okay. But doing this not from a space of, again, that fear, but like just that confidence and that comfort that we can be in control. And I'll get to a second story with that here. But our power never went out because we had the fire station. We were never even part of the rolling blackouts. So my family was okay. We had food. Everyone stayed warm. For the most part, we went out and played. That was fine. But like we were okay. But I triggered a trauma response for myself during that time. Like and I'm still not quite sure like what like the fear was there, but it was like we weren't going to be okay. There was going to be something happen. And I know I created a lot of that whenever Wyatt, my second, was in the hospital, and that lack of control that showed up because I felt like I had, quote, failed my family because we hadn't hit the income goal, or I hadn't hit the income goal that I had set. So even though like I was there when it counted and we did all those things, I know we've talked about this before, but I created that story there that like I had failed my family and I wasn't able to take care of my family. So I believe that's that source of that. But regardless, it wasn't a logical response. It was emotional. So we have to understand that what we're doing is Like we have to work on the emotional part too. So when these fears come up, don't beat yourself up over it logically. We need to take the steps that we can to take care of yourself. Okay. So this is going to be like self-care, whether it is avoiding social media, avoiding like the news, not watching the news. What are those triggers for you that make you feel in that fear? And how can you limit them or eliminate them? Is it something that you really need? Can somebody else update you on this right now? Because you have to protect where you're at. Also with trauma and like when those responses are triggered, what can you do to help you reframe? We talk about multiple resources for breakdowns, whenever that shows up, whether this is like getting outside, grounding yourself, it's like standing barefoot in the grass, getting the fresh air, the sunshine, removing yourself from the situation, working with a coach. That's part of the reason why I'm so excited about the Unstoppable experience, because we're going to have that on the go personalized support that we need to again. So I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to check that out. That's my 12-month group mentorship program where you can get that personalized support. But having somebody there to help you walk through some of those things that are going on and reframe. Another resource could be EFT tapping, emotional freedom technique. I don't have a resource handy on that one, but that has been game changing for me for the last 9 months. With all of the triggers, everything that comes up, the emotional aspect, when we're working through those things and understanding and deconditioning, that's been huge. So we have to take care of you, right? Because this does affect you. And again, it's not logical, but being mindful and moving forward and focusing on what we can control. So we're going to get into more of those specifics on the action steps that you can take on what you can control when it comes to what's going on in the economy, really on an ongoing basis, because there's always going to be things out there that's happening, right? Just that's the way it is. All right. We talked about why inflation has changed, some of the manipulation that happens with the US dollar, why that happens, why it's so all over the place, how to take care of yourself, and why that's important, focusing on eliminating some of those triggers, but understanding and giving yourself that grace that it's not necessarily a logical response and moving forward in that moment. So whether that was the getting outside, working with a coach, EFT tapping, but truly like learning what those triggers are and modifying that for yourself, that's the biggest thing, because you're protecting your peace and your space there, and you don't have to work to regain things, and you can still be knowledgeable about what's going on. You just don't have to be in the middle of it, in the thick of it. That makes such a massive difference. All right. That's what I got for now. Next week, we'll talk about like the action steps that you should be taking right now to make sure that you are on track and that you are truly unstoppable when it comes to your finances, in spite of what's going on with the economy, election, whatever new crazy thing that we are dealing with, right? All right. If you got questions, send me a message on Instagram. I'd love to hear from you. Like truly, I mean that. I love hearing from listeners and the takeaways and the things that you are finding helpful. So send me a message on Instagram at Aimee Cerka. Links in the show notes as well. We'll see you next time. Bye for now. If you're struggling with shame and guilt around your finances, whether it's debt, impulse spending, mistakes from the past, or the fact that you still haven't hit your income goal, then it's time for you to work with me. There are different levels of support and price points that you can use on the path to removing that guilt and shame so you can step into your unstoppable life. After all, your finances are unique to you, and your support should be too. Go to workwithaimee.com to get started with one of my most popular programs, or you can book a Q&A call with me and we'll figure out what that next step should be. And those links are hanging out in the description of this video as well.